The lawyer, the map, the impossible idea. When the law looked like a wall, I found a map that acted like a key, and an impossible idea that would change everything. I drove back to the HOA office, a newly constructed building that looked more like a corporate bank branch than a community center. I demanded to see Karen. Her assistant, a nervous young woman, told me Mrs. Dwyer was unavailable. I stood my ground. Finally, Karen emerged from her office. She didn't look triumphant. She looked bored. "Mr. Palmer," she said, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. "This is unfortunate, but the rules are the rules. The community cannot be held hostage by absentee owners. We have standards to maintain. You were sent numerous notices. You chose not to respond. The property was falling into disrepair. We acted within our rights to preserve property values for everyone." I held up the deed transfer paper. "This is a forgery. I was never here to sign this." Her smile was thin and cold. "The document is notarized, Mr. Palmer. If you have a complaint, take it up with the State Notary Commission. But until a court rules otherwise, that property belongs to my son. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a community to run." She turned and walked back into her office, closing the door with a soft, definitive click. I was defeated, outmaneuvered. The system I had ignored had been used like a weapon to bludgeon me out of my own life. I spent the next 2 days in a fog of anger and despair. I met with a lawyer in town who confirmed the grim reality. Fighting this would be expensive, time-consuming, and the HOA had deep pockets. The forged document was a problem, but proving it could take years. Karen knew this. She was counting on me to give up. On the third day, as I was drinking bad coffee in a diner, staring at the survey map I always kept in my truck, my eyes caught on a detail I'd seen 1,000 times, but never truly considered: the original property. Lines from my father's deed. They didn't follow the modern road. They cut a swath right through what was now the community's main artery and included a sliver of land directly under the HOA's new headquarters. A crazy, impossible idea began to form in my mind. If they wanted to play games with property lines, maybe I could play a better one. I wasn't gonna fight them in their courtroom. I was gonna fight them on my terms, on my land. The lawyer, a shrewd older man named Robert Evans, listened to my idea with a growing look of astonishment. "You want to do what?" I spread the original yellowed survey map on his desk, my finger tracing the lines. "According to this, my property doesn't stop at the modern tree line everyone assumes is the border. When my father bought this land, the old county road ran 20 feet to the north. The HOA built their new road and their new office on what they thought was common area. But this map says a significant portion of that land, including the ground, under the eastern corner of their building, is still part of my original parcel. It was never legally subdivided or sold to the association." Robert put on his reading glasses and bent over the map, comparing it to the current county plat maps on his computer screen. His silence stretched for a long time. Finally, he let out a low whistle. "You're right, there's a discrepancy, a big one. When the HOA incorporated and laid out the common areas, they used a simplified modern survey. They never reconciled it with the original, more complex metes and bounds descriptions of the older lots. This is a title company's worst nightmare. So I can build a fence on my actual property line?" I asked, my heart starting to pound. He leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. "You can exercise your rights as a property owner to demarcate your boundary. If that boundary happens to run through a road and directly alongside that building, that's their problem, not yours. They built on your landmark. They're the trespassers." The reversal was dizzying. The victim was now the holder of rights. The predator was squatting on my property. I had been focused on the theft of my cabin, blind to the much larger, more powerful weapon I had lying in my truck all along. I wasn't just going to get my home back. I was going to show Karen that her entire little empire was built on a foundation of sand and legal oversight. The fencing company arrived the next morning with a flatbed truck loaded with 10-foot-high, black powder-coated steel panels. They were industrial, imposing, and exactly what I wanted. I met them at the community gate. The same security guard tried to stop us. I showed him the court order Robert had hastily filed, an injunction affirming my right to access my property to conduct lawful business. The guard's radio crackled. It was Karen's voice, sharp and angry. "Stop them!" But the guard just shrugged and raised the barrier. He was paid to enforce rules, not to break court orders. We drove to the far northeastern corner of my property, the point where the original survey pin was still buried deep under the soil. The foreman used a metal detector to find it. With a bright orange stake, we marked the true beginning of my land. It was 30 yards into what everyone now considered the community's main road. The auger or the post hole digger bit into the asphalt with a sound of screaming protest. The first post went up right in the center of the pavement. By the time Karen arrived in her golf cart, her face a mask of fury, the second post was already cemented in place, and the crew was unrolling the first black steel panel. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked, scrambling out of the cart. "You're destroying community property." I turned to her, the survey map in my hands. "Actually, Karen, I'm building a fence on my property. You should be more careful about where you build your roads and your office." Her eyes darted from the map to the fence post planted firmly in the asphalt. For the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes, quickly replaced by raw panic. She knew exactly what that map was and what it meant. "This isn't over, Palmer," she spat, her voice trembling with rage. "I'll have an injunction against you by noon." I smiled, a cold, hard thing. I already have one. The sound of the next post being driven into the earth drowned out whatever she said next. The auger bit into the asphalt, and the first post went up, right in the middle of their road. The victim had become the one with the power to humiliate the predator. Would you ever use old maps and surveys to fight back? If you found out your land extended into someone else's property, would you fence it off or take the legal route? Tell me your move. The fence through the road. When the fence cut the road and came up against their building, it wasn't just a boundary, it was a provocation. The community started to wake up. The fence grew throughout the day, a stark black scar across the manicured perfection of Crystal Shores. It cut the main road in two, forcing residents to take a long, muddy detour through the woods. And it ran true to the survey line right up to the poured concrete foundation of the HOA headquarters. We stopped just inches from the building's wall. The message was undeniable. Karen's promised injunction never materialized. My lawyer had been faster, his filing pointing out the HOA's own negligent surveying and their unlawful construction on my private property. The judge, unimpressed with Karen's hysterics, issued a temporary order allowing me to continue the fencing until a full survey could be completed, a process that would take weeks. The community was in an uproar, but it wasn't the kind Karen wanted. People weren't angry with me. They were fascinated. They came to watch, to take pictures, to point at the map I'd photocopied and taped to a fence panel. For the first time, someone was standing up to Karen Dwyer. That evening, as the crew packed up, an older woman I knew vaguely as Miss Gable, the widow with the wind chimes, approached me cautiously. She handed me a manila folder. Her hands were shaking. "I was on the social committee last year," she whispered, her eyes darting around nervously. "Before I resigned, Karen kept unusual records. I thought you should see this. Inside the folder were photocopies of HOA financial statements. At first glance, they looked normal. Dues collected, expenses for landscaping, and maintenance. But Miss Gable had circled several lines in red pen. Large recurring payments to a company called Lakeside Security and Consulting. The memos listed the expenses as perimeter patrol services and community compliance enforcement. The amounts were staggering, thousands of dollars a month. "I did some digging," she murmured. "There is no Lakeside Security. The address is a P.O. box in the next town. The bank account it's paid into. It's under the name Travis Dwyer. The pieces snapped together with terrifying clarity. The security that patrolled the gates, the men who issued the fines, they weren't a real company. They were Karen's private militia, funded by the HOA dues of the very people they harassed, and she was funneling the money directly to her son. This wasn't just about my cabin. My cabin was a pretext, a convenient way to get a valuable waterfront. Property for free. This was a sophisticated embezzlement scheme disguised as community governance. The fines, the punitive fees, they weren't about maintaining standards. They were a revenue stream, a way to inflate the HOA's expenses to justify the massive payments to her fake company. She was stealing from everyone. She was probably doing it to other owners, using arcane bylaws to seize properties for violations, only to transfer them to shell companies or associates. My cabin was just the most brazen example. The fight was no longer personal, it was moral. I couldn't just win my property back. I had to tear the whole corrupt system down. That night, parked near my fenced-off cabin, I saw a figure skulking around the HOA office. It was Travis. He wasn't smug anymore. He looked scared. He used a key to let himself in. A light went on in Karen's office. I saw their shadows through the blinds, gesticulating, arguing. Then another figure arrived, a large man in a lakeside security jacket. They were panicking. The fence wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a physical barrier that drew everyone's attention to the very building where their crimes were coordinated. And I was on the outside, now holding not just a survey map, but the first real evidence of their fraud. I had them cornered. But a cornered animal is the most dangerous kind. It wasn't a security company at all. The money went straight to Travis Dwyer. This was bigger than my cabin. If you found a paper trail like that, would you expose it publicly or take it to the authorities quietly? Would you drop those documents into every mailbox like I did? Or would you hand them to the press? Comment below. Check out next part for more.